for me growing up, I grew up in a house where you fought to win, like there was, in every intellectual conversation, there was a winner and a loser. And so I learned so much from watching Shane manage internal conversations, and it helped me so much figure out how to really gain buy-in for new big things that we wanted to do. And so that idea of yes and is kind of like when you are trying to sell something, the best thing you can do is to start with understanding who your buyer is and what they want, and ask them more questions, and that will kind of help you guys get aligned. So that idea of yes and was huge for me.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Here's one thing I love about a career in marketing. I've gotten the opportunity to learn the inner workings of so many other industries I would have never been exposed to if I didn't have to tell their story. So I learned my skill isn't necessarily to know everything about every industry, but is to be able to learn quickly and work with subject matter experts to get the knowledge out of their head and clearly communicate it to the ideal customer. Or as our next guest put it in her podcast guest application, you don't have to know it to lead it. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Christine Healy, the Chief Growth Officer at Seniorly. Thanks for joining us, Christine.
Hi, Daniel. I'm really excited to be here. I have to tell you, on most days, I don't necessarily feel like I've made it in marketing. So to be on this podcast, I'm like, okay, today's a good day.
I appreciate that humility. And the play on words of the podcast. We as marketers get to make things. So I look forward to learning from what you've made in your career. But first, let's talk about that career. Just quick look at your background. You were Director of Marketing and E-commerce at Lynn Evans, Vice President of Marketing at EF Explore America, Vice President of Consumer Growth Marketing at Bright Horizons, and for the past 2 years, Christine has been Chief Growth Officer at Seniorly. Seniorly has raised $6.5 million in Series A funding, and Christine and her team have attracted 5 million visitors per year to their site. So, Christine, give us a sense, what is your day like as Chief Growth Officer at Seniorly?
Well, I know you ask this of everyone, and the answer is usually the same. There's no such thing as a typical day. The only constant in my day is my morning routine. So I usually wake up, I will have a cup of coffee with my husband. I sign up for a ton of Google alerts on every kind of term in my industry. And I do spend a lot of time reading through kind of news updates about what's happening, whether it's from a legislative perspective, from a business perspective, from a consumer perspective. And that's kind of fun for me. I will usually walk the dog and listen to some podcasts. So I listen to this podcast, but there are a few other favorites too. And then before I start my day, I will usually hit up a few customer forums. So Seniorly works with older adults and their families who are looking to find senior living solutions. And, our primary audience is an adult caregiver. So this is, someone my age, mid-40s, mid-50s, who's helping to manage care for a family. And it is challenging for them. And there are all kinds of support groups across the internet, lots of Facebook forums. And so I'll usually spend a few minutes just kind of reading through people's posts just to kind of get a sense of what their life is like. And, there are days that I have to stop doing it because it can get pretty heavy for a lot of those people. But it's also really informative and absolutely helps me stay in touch with why I do this. I think one of the things that I'm sure a lot of us find is, as our careers grow, we get further and further away from the end user, and that this is a nice and easy way for me to stay connected to the people that we're serving.
I love that, Christine.
Yeah.
One of the things I always talk about as our challenge as marketers is customer intimacy. How can we increase customer intimacy? How can we stop looking at just databases at numbers and actually interact with people? And, there's going to events, working in a retail store if you have it, going on a sales call. I mean, there's a lot of great ways to do it. But sometimes marketers tell me, well, I can't. I don't have a budget for that event, or we don't have a store, whatever it is. But everyone could do what you do.
Yeah.
Go in that forum. That's so good. One of my favorite interviews was with the CMO of a mobile company, Mint Mobile. And he mentioned he was really active in Reddit, especially after they launched a campaign, because he wanted to interact with people and see what they thought of the campaign. So kudos to you. What's like one of the biggest things you learned? Like going in, I know you mentioned this, the sentiment and the feeling,
Yeah.
and that's important to get inside of their heads. But was there something ever a time where you read something and you're like, well, I didn't really know that or think that about the customer?
It's going to be very unsexy, and we're going to go there already. We're like 5 minutes into this podcast, but I will say that incontinence is an issue that these people are struggling with so much, and it is an issue that nobody is talking about. So, that was a really, really easy way for us to kind of say, oh boy, we need to write more content about this. But I've also had seen posts where people say, why don't they make an app for such and such? Or why isn't there a tool that, and those I take straight back to our product team and say, how do we build this?
That's perfect.
So yeah, there's a lot of inspiration that comes from there.
That's fantastic. Well, let's dive into it and see what lessons we can learn from the things you made in marketing. As I said, that's a great thing we get to do as marketers, right? I've never been a podiatrist or actuary or anything else, but I don't feel like they get to make things like we do. We get to make them. So your first lesson, you said, believe in people. How did you learn that lesson?
Well, I feel like I have benefited from people believing in me my entire career, but really it started when I joined a company called EF Education. So EF is this incredible company. It's based, North American headquarters are in Boston, and they kind of exist at the intersection of all things related to education, culture, and travel. So if you think au pair programs and high school year abroad and language programs, and it's a really interesting company because it's very big. It's probably pushing 40,000 employees by now, but it's very much a founder-led company. And this guy who founded it, Bertel Holt, is a really interesting guy. He's dyslexic. I think he was told by so many teachers that he would never graduate high school. And he founded EF in his college basement. And he had this concept that people, that if you hire correctly, most of the time those people can do any job. So, Bertel looked for people who were interested, engaged, passionate, curious, smart, hardworking, ambitious. And he believed in this idea of lateral movement. So, it was called the spiral staircase. So, you might start in one function, and if you were doing well, you might get moved to a totally different function. And there was something really, really great about that feeling of stepping into something new that you weren't prepared for, that you had no business kind of running, and having people around you believe that you could do it. So, I worked with this woman named Michelle Berglund, who's fantastic. And she started out as a controller and, ended up as a VP of HR. There are very few organizations that would, move someone from a controller to HR with, a stint in operations in the middle. So I think that kind of started my way of thinking about roles and jobs and people's ability to do more than really what they were just trained for. But I will also say, that I've been given a lot of things that I had no business being put into, and you kind of figure it out.
Yeah, so I love that lesson from an internal kind of hiring perspective, internal management perspective. Let me ask, how do you apply that with your marketing, believe in people? Like, how do you use the people in your company in your messaging and your value proposition? For example, our founder, Flint McLaughlin, when he wrote Transparent Marketing, he said, people buy from people. People don't buy from companies, from stores, or from websites. People buy from people. Marketing is not about programs. It is about relationships. And for example, I remember interviewing a key marketing leader at IBM. I don't remember who, but it was the early days of social media. And I asked him about what their policy was of having employees on social media. And he's like, look, we trust them with our
Yeah.
patents and our trade secrets and our customers. How can we not trust them with social media? So for you, Christine, like how you believe in people, how do you believe in people when it comes to getting that marketing message out there? How do you use them in that marketing
Well, I mean,
message?
if I hire people that I believe in, I trust the recommendations that they're bringing to me without a doubt. So, even if I have had many people pitch something to me that, I'm not seeing it, I'm not feeling it, but I can see in their eyes that they think this is going to work. And I let people run with it, because I think for me, that's the greatest way that I've grown, is by people giving me, the leeway to try and fail and try and succeed. And yeah.
So I hear you, but let me ask this a different way. So a lot of times with websites or a factory, whatever it is, all of the value is hidden there. And with our marketing campaigns, right, it's not just this faceless company getting those people out there. Whether it's, I remember Walmart used to put their associates as models in their flyers they'd put out. Or for example, for Seniorly, I think there's some on your website, you have like local advocates or something to that extent. So I just wonder, we're in this digital age. I love what you mentioned about how you try to break that down and go into forums and learn about the customers, the people. But in this digital age where we're hiding behind websites and AI and ads and all of these things, and people don't necessarily get to go face to face and see everyone in a store like they used to, how do you use the people within your organization, in any organization you've worked in, as part of that marketing message to get them out there to make that human connection with a customer?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, I would actually think way beyond the walls of the organization, and really going back to kind of creating evangelists for your product. So, one of the interesting things about the place that marketing sits in today's organizations is that we are really, I think we're kind of at the nexus of a lot of different functions. So we work, just as much with product as we do with sales, as we do with operations. And so I think when you can work cross-functionally to make sure that what you're delivering is really consistent with what you're promising, you create your own army of people who are talking about you and recommending you. And that is way more effective, frankly, than any marketing campaign could ever do. And then you can also take those people and feature them in marketing as well. But yeah, I mean, I've been in situations where I have willingly or suggested giving up marketing spend or marketing headcount if I thought it was going to solve, a problem in the product. Because I really firmly believe, like, if we build a great product, the rest of it is really easy.
That is another great insight. I don't want people listening to overlook that. I think sometimes we silo these things, and as marketing, we're just focused on let's get our programs out there, our brand, get our media buys right and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, what are we doing if we don't have a valuable product? And so the fact that you said, I will sacrifice some of my marketing budget to make a better product, the product is the best marketing. That's fantastic, Christine. Good for you.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So your next lesson, you said, embrace the crisis. It feels, and maybe it just feels this way, and this isn't true for the history of humanity, but it feels like, boy, we do get our share of crises lately. So
Yeah.
How did you learn this lesson to embrace the crisis?
Yeah. And so I suppose I should start by, putting a caveat on crisis. This isn't an opportunity to take advantage of, the horrible things that are happening in the world. My personal lessons are embrace crises in the business. So, I think back to times that I have really been challenged to think differently as a marketer or a salesperson. I started my career in sales, and they've all been around things that were happening in the world that were really challenging for the business I was in. So, when 9/11 happened, I was working in the travel industry. I was actually working in the student travel industry. And that was a really, really challenging time to be in marketing. We had to figure out how to make this a safe proposition for parents and students and teachers to still travel. We had to make it a fun proposition, but we also had to do it in a way that was not disrespectful to what had happened. And so this was another time that, I spent a lot of time on the phone with angry parents. Like, I probably spent 3 months taking customer calls from people who were telling me that, moving forward in the face of what had happened was terrible, but it really it gave me insight into how to manage the messaging and how to adjust, our campaigns to be much more targeted. So, for the few years after that, we had previously had a spray and pray approach, and we really did very targeted, highly segmented sends and campaigns so that we could try to minimize the amount of agitas that was coming around from it, I guess. And I think there's something wonderful that happens, and I'm not saying any crisis is wonderful, but there's something that is wonderful that happens when you have constraints put around you as a marketer. I think it forces you to think more creatively. I think it streamlines your approach. It gets rid of a lot of the fluff that as marketers we can tend to create. I think another time was very recent. I was working in early education during COVID. That was another crazy time. People are obviously, children are one of the most valuable resources in general. And, parents were very, very nervous about sending their kids back to school and trying to figure out how to balance their own work and, keeping their kids and their family safe. And there was a period of time that we really just had to back off on the sell and move towards adding value. So that was a time where, we thought, geez, what else can we do that would be interesting, that would say something about our brand, that would help in this situation. And we actually ended up partnering with Ariana Huffington, who runs an organization called Thrive Global. And we opened up sites for, and this was in the early stages, for healthcare workers to take care of their children. So even as a marketer, if you're not always focused on kind of growing the business, there are still other things you can do to contribute. And, for me, I think all of the places I've worked have been very mission focused. And so that part feels good for me too, just being able to find other things to contribute when stuff happens. And my last point is just, I think when crises happen, my feeling is generally people don't know what to do, right? That's the nature of a crisis. There's no playbook. And so people tend to hold back and wait until they're given direction. And my advice to anybody, whether you're in marketing or anywhere else, is to lean into the crisis, to do something, to create a plan and let someone react to it. Because I will tell you, as someone who's led through a couple crises, the hardest part is trying to figure out how to use everyone properly to move the business forward. So, yeah.
So when you say embrace a crisis, the other thing I think about is a corporate crisis, like something, there's a bigger thing, just COVID-19, but there's something happens in the company. I know I'm getting these pitches endlessly from PR companies, hey, crisis communications. And so, have you ever had that experience of a crisis in the company and how you handle that? Because, for example, when I've written about making claims credible in marketing, one of the tests we wrote about, I love this, weakness one. There was a test of a weakness subject line versus an incentive subject line, right? Incentive is the traditional thing you'd put. Yep. Nobody wants to share weakness, and weakness did 21% better.
It's the negativity bias, right?
Well, I don't know. So let me challenge. I don't know if it's a negativity bias. I wonder, is there credibility and transparency? And I think, for example, I love the Domino's Pizza campaign maybe a decade ago where they said, hey, our pizza was bad and we needed to make it better. It's not that people didn't know, but when you hear a brand come out and say that, you're like, okay. Yeah. And I will say, there's a lot of things I'm unsure about Elon Musk lately, but I don't know if he's even intentionally doing this, but he'll point out the weaknesses of his car company and his Twitter X and his rocket stuff. Not even intentionally, just thinks out loud. And I think because of that, he does have credibility with a certain group that hears that. So embrace the crisis. Have you ever been in a situation where, hey, the crisis was something the company did maybe was wrong or perceived badly, and then how do you embrace that weakness? Do you come out clearly, or what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, fortunately, I haven't really ever been. The things the things that are coming to mind are more kind of in PR, in the PR realm. It's not really product related. When I worked at EF, all kinds of things happen, with kids on tour in Europe. But those don't really impact marketing. So there's nothing that's really coming to mind right now.
We can go into that. I mean, a lot of marketers at smaller companies might have to be in PR. We are close to our PR brethren. Like, we need to work together. We control that brand if we're going to control that brand. So we can dive into a little PR. I'd be okay with that. I think our listeners would want to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, so I think, marketing tends to partner with lots of different functions at different times. For me, PR is a big one. When I worked at EF, there are things that happen to kids on tour because kids on tour are teenagers and in other countries, and you kind of have to manage communications very delicately when stuff happens. I would say the same in early ed, in early education and preschool. When things happen with children that might be the fault of a teacher who just happened to turn their back, and those are much more small scale. So again, my inclination whenever those things happen is always to go back to one-on-one communication. They're not necessarily marketing solutions. It's, holding meetings, it's talking to people, it's gaining trust, it's showing transparency, it's showing a willingness to listen, it's making it personal. And I can't tell you as a marketer and still as a chief growth officer, how much time I spend on the phone talking to customers. So, I'm on the channel that gets customer complaints. Like, I will pick up the phone probably every other day and call a customer and just listen to them. Partially because I want to hear what they have to say, but partially because I want those people to know that we care.
Okay. So another lesson you had was say yes and. So is that from improv is where you learned that? And how do you
Oh my
use
gosh,
that?
it is. So years ago, we had an offsite and we were working on a team building exercise, and we had an improv company come in and force us to do all these yes and exercises. And there's something about that idea of yes and that just stuck with me because, I tend to be a no but person. So it was really illuminating. And I think, for me, there were a couple ways that I apply that very differently. The first is in terms of managing internal communication. So as a marketer, when you're planning for a new season or planning for a new budget or a new campaign, sometimes if you want to do something big and new that doesn't have a proven ROI, there's a budget associated with that. And getting that budget passed is sometimes one of the hardest things to do. And I worked with a guy named Shane Steffens, who is now, I think he's a president of one of the products at EF. But Shane had this really interesting background. He went to school at Notre Dame. He studied literature. And I think all they did in this major was debate classics. So he had this incredible way of debating people where everyone felt like a winner. So his response, anytime he didn't agree with anyone, he would always ask them more questions to help himself understand their perspective. And for me, growing up, I grew up in a house where you fought to win, like there was in every intellectual conversation, there was a winner and a loser. And so I learned so much from watching Shane manage internal conversations, and it helped me so much figure out how to really gain buy-in for new big things that we wanted to do. And so that idea of yes and is kind of like, when you are trying to sell something, the best thing you can do is to start with understanding who your buyer is and what they want, and ask them more questions. And that will kind of help you guys get aligned. So that idea of yes and was huge for me. I will also say that, yes and has been a functional part of my career. I am not one of those people who ever knew what I wanted to do. When I graduated college, I thought I was going to go back and get a degree in history. And so have never been a 5-year career plan person. And I really just kind of said yes to anything that was offered to me along the way. And so, that has, given me experience in managing build out for construction of new stores. You show up and you're managing a construction crew and pulling permits, and no one has given you any idea how to do that. Or, heading to New York to be a buyer for clothes, to bring it to a marketing perspective, I moved into a newer job at a division of EF Education. And, as I am apt to do, I kind of spent the first few months just listening. I know a lot of people come into a new job with 90-day plans, and I'm kind of the opposite. I usually tell people, don't expect anything from me for 90 days. All I want to do is learn and listen. And I came into this role, and like I usually do, I'm reviewing the marketing materials. I'm listening to sales calls, and I very quickly realize, wow, there's a huge problem here. Marketing is saying one thing. We're going to market with a low price guarantee message and, a licensing deal with a very strong educational brand. And nobody on the phones is even mentioning it or talking about it. So I'm like, whoa, whatever marketing is promising is not what sales is delivering. And there is like a huge disconnect. And so, I went to the leadership team and said, I think we have this big problem. And, all of a sudden, they were saying, yes, and what do we do about it? And so then you kind of go to, okay, well, I think we need to rebrand. And they're like, yes, and what should we do? And it really led to this whole kind of reinvention of the product itself, which again, like I had no business doing. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was one of those things that you figure out along the way. And in this case, it was a fascinating process, something I had never done before. We worked with a woman named, her name was Chris Prentice, and she was out of the Parsons School of Design. And she was a customer ethnographer. Have you ever worked with one of these guys?
I have not. That sounds fascinating.
Okay. So here's what they do. It's really cool. They go out and they basically like trail your customers for 24 or 48 hours. So we gave Chris a list of 30 of our customers, and she would fly out to Des Moines, Iowa, and she would meet, Miss Bukowski, the teacher, at her house at 6 a.m. She'd drive with Miss Bukowski to school. She'd stop at Dunkin' Donuts with her. She'd sit in the back of her classroom. She would go to the teacher's lounge at lunch. She would, go to the basketball game after school. She would sit with her while Miss Bukowski graded homework. And you just literally like inhabit the life of your customers for a day or two, just to kind of see what are they really dealing with? What are their pressures? What are their stressors? And that really led us to that exercise was the pivotal moment for us figuring out actually, this is what our product is. And for us, what it meant is, we had this history of, running a company for 40 years, and our value proposition to teachers was always something around, make your subject come alive. So it might have been make history come alive, or, make French come alive for your students, because the assumption was these teachers were teaching because they had a passion for the project, for the topic, right? And what we found out is that the best teachers, the teachers who repeated year after year and took the most kids to Europe, actually didn't care that much about what they were teaching. They were teaching because they loved being around kids and they loved teenagers. And if you ask them what their dream was, what's the best outcome for you with a kid? It's like, I just want to be that teacher that a kid comes back to after they graduate from college. I just want to be that teacher that someone comes back and says, thank you, you were so awesome. And that was the moment that we realized, actually, that's what our product is. Travel is how we do it, but our product is making this lasting moment for teachers and students. Our product is allowing teachers to change students' lives. So there was a very, very long answer to this to the question about yes and, but that's kind of what you get when you just have this yes and approach. It's like, okay, yes and what does that mean? Yes and what does that mean? And you just kind of find yourself down some crazy rabbit hole 2 years later.
Well, no, I want to just stop and point out that we were talking about customer intimacy before, and that, I mean, is a whole other level of customer
Yeah.
intimacy. If we were not talking about marketing in a business, if we remove that, that is itself a beautiful story. Like to learn about, I mean, seriously, to learn about other human beings and to say, how could we better help those other human beings be the best version of themselves?
Yeah.
Right. If you took a marketing department out of it, like that's beautiful. Like that, that to me, that is an exciting thing that we should get to do as marketers, customer first marketing. We should learn about them, not just to hit a KPI or something, right?
Yeah.
We should learn about them to serve them. And then from serving them, hopefully hit that KPI and get the brand right. Like you said, that's beautiful. I mean, was that inspirational to you?
Yeah. Well, especially because, I mentioned I'm tend to be somewhat mission driven, but, to serve teachers, like, oh my God, what a gift,
Yeah, no, it's funny when you said that. Actually, my wife's a teacher, so I was listening closely. What did you learn? And that was actually probably pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. What does she teach?
English as a second language. So she gets students who are just fresh to America, barely speak English from all over the world, and she helps them speak it. Yeah, but it is true too. Like I think her passion more is kind of like what I want my passion to be for marketing is helping people versus a specific subject. So like the thing she's teaching helps people, right? Not just like, oh, this subject is so great. It's the helping people, which we as marketers can emulate too. Obviously, we're probably not at the level of a teacher, but again, not just KPIs and databases, helping people. And that's what our brand should be about. But let's talk about this yes and idea, because I want to challenge it or at least unpack it or at least understand it better. I love improv. I love what you're saying a lot, especially when it comes to brainstorming. I love yes and. I try to lean towards yes. But here's one of my biggest struggles, and I think the biggest struggle for many marketing leaders, for many businesses, is prioritization. So I want to know how you balance yes and prioritization. Because for me, for example, I'll mention we have, so Mech Labs is the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. We have this whole patented process about how we do marketing. It's called the conversion sequence heuristic. And for me, that is something that helps prioritize, okay, what we're going to do in marketing, what we do in a landing page and different things, right? There's a methodology we can prioritize, because without that, my gosh, it just seems overwhelming. It's just a blue space. So how have you in your career or in leading an organization, how do you prioritize yes and? I mean, how do you like go after yes and, but at the same time, every yes is a no to something else. You only have so much time in the day, so much budget.
Every yes
no, it's not. Am I thinking about it wrong?
Every yes is not a no for something else. It's a later for something else, right? So I would say the way that I think about it is anything relating to the delivery of the promise, whatever that promise is. It's a product, it's a service, it's a whatever. That has to come first, whether that's marketing or whether it's a marketing function or something else. Then everything else is just graded on like an LOE, a level of effort estimate, and an LOI, a level of impact. And so we kind of do, sometimes they're database and sometimes they're kind of back of the napkin, and we just create a matrix that says like, okay, here's all the stuff we want to do. And which ones are going to get us the farthest, the fastest.
So it sounds like it starts with yes and, but where the rubber meets the road, there's that matrix, level of effort, level of impact, and that's what we decide either to go to market or to invest in or whatever.
Yep. That's how we do it.
I can live with that. I like it. All right, I mentioned this at the opening. I love this. I've always felt this as a marketer. The part of the fun of being a marketer is you get to learn about all these industries, right? Even if you don't know them. And you said you don't have to know it to lead it. So I love when you mentioned, so you have been in your career from the earliest, like early education. Yep. It sounded like kind of the middle level in education, like K through 12, I guess. Now you're at seniors, so you've kind of probably spread the breadth of human life. So what is this? You don't have to know it to lead it. How did you learn that lesson?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned it from personal experience. I mean, my first job at EF, I was hired. I showed up. To be completely honest, I don't even think I knew what my title was or what I was supposed to be doing. And this was 25 years ago, before things were, what they are now, which is like, there's a lot of clarity. And I walked into my office and I literally had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. like none. I didn't even know what function I was sitting in. And so, you figure it out. I started just grabbing my coffee in the morning and visiting colleagues and kind of pretending to talk to them, but like sneaking a look at what was on their computer. And you kind of realize like, oh, Jeff looks at, these spreadsheets every morning, and Karina has a stand-up meeting every morning, and this other person does that. And so I think, we often, and I will say, especially women, I think we often underestimate our ability to figure things out and to manage being imperfect for a period of time. People in general are capable of so much more than we think of them. You don't have to have a marketing degree to be a great marketer. You don't have to have a writing degree to be a great writer. So I think, great ideas come from anywhere. And, this goes back to that kind of first lesson about if you hire smart, talented, creative, curious, ambitious people, they will help you figure it out. So, that story I talked about, I just shared about rebranding, like I had never rebranded a company. I had never reinvented a company. There's another one where, this again was at EF, but I was tasked with a few other people to develop a startup under the EF umbrella. So EF had these travel products for middle school and high school. They had travel products for adults, but they were missing that kind of segment between high school and adulthood. And so we were tasked with starting a college product for travel. And because EF had such a strong proven history in their model, the assumption was we would set the model up the same way that all the other travel products were, which was, you do seasonal campaigns, you have, give, forget, where you get people to sign up for something, like a chance to win a free trip or a travel poster or whatever. And then that's your lead pool. And, we set everything up. We got the computers. We hired the salespeople. We had a team of like 35. And, we did advanced marketing, and we got, 10,000 leads within a couple days, and we started calling out. And can you guess what happened when we started?
When people got the calls, they're like, what the heck?
Yeah. Well, we're calling college kids. And college kids, like, they don't want to talk on the phone. They don't want to be sold. Half the time, they're not even awake when we're calling them at 1. If we start calling them at 4, they're maybe pre-party. They're, starting to do their evening activities and having a little, And so literally on day 3, I was like, oh my God, I think we have a huge problem. Like, this model does not work for the college market. And this was back in the early 2000s. And it was really before e-commerce had expanded. So at that time, e-commerce was really very commodities focused. It was, you could buy things online, you could research online, but you certainly didn't necessarily sell experiential or high-end products online. And so, at the end of the first week, we were like, oh, is this not going to work? Is this not going to work? And so, we had a brainstorm with 2 of my friends, one of whom is this guy named Healy, who's just a brilliant. We both have very similar backgrounds in sales and marketing, but we come at it so differently. I'm very data strategy focused. He's like a creative genius, and we just make such a good team. So that's another plug, is like, find somebody who works differently than you, and they will end up being your best friend 20 years later. And we said, I think we can figure out a way to do this online. But again, marketing automation systems didn't exist. There weren't email platforms. And so we built all these things by code. And we kind of were just, I had a head salesperson, and I said, I want you to spend the next week on the calls, and I want you to diagram what these calls are like. I want you to create a name for each part of the call, whether it's solution, objection, questions. And we need to figure out how to replicate that through, and it was email at the time, really. And we did it. So that's kind of another example of just being able to trust in yourself and be okay with failure and be okay with trying. I mean, another thing that we did, this was when Facebook was just first launching. And I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I'm just going to build our own forum. So I had our tech team build a Facebook for our site. And by the time they were done, I was like, forget it. Yeah, that's not going to work.
There's already a Facebook.
Yeah, there's already a Facebook.
That is another great example where you're trying to say, okay, like what would a real in-person conversation be like? These people, college students, don't want in-person conversations. Yeah. By the way, most people do not want to sign up for a computer or whatever and get a phone call. And then you said, well, how can we replicate that in email? And again, I just want to point out to listeners, that's another great customer first, really kind of close that customer intimacy loop. And I'll mention one thing actually that Christina mentioned to me before we were prepping. She asked me, what makes these fun for you? And I will say, I would think back, and wonderful guests I've had. They're all been fantastic, very customer-focused people. I don't think anyone has asked me that before.
Well, Daniel, I'm just here to make it fun for you.
that is what we should be doing as marketers for our customers, right? Yeah. We're here to make it fun for them. So I love that. I love that attitude. But so I think that's, again, that great attitude going forward. I also wanted to point out, I think you mentioned Jeff Healy. Were you two related? Or
oh, no, Jeff Healy.
Oh, okay.
But I will say it's funny. Many people thought we were married because people misunderstood his last name.
I know his brother-in-law. Well, I bring that up because in the first half of the episode, we talk about lessons from the things that our guests have made. In the second half, we talk about lessons from the people they collaborated with, because that is a great thing we get to do as marketers. We get to make things and we get to make them with people and learn from them. But first, I should mention the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can get 10,000 marketing experiments working for you with a free trial of the MECLabs AI Guild at meclabs.com/AI. That's MECLABS.com/AI. And you can get the artificial intelligence revolution working for you. So, Christina, so you've mentioned a lot of people already. I appreciate it. I can see you're definitely someone who learns from people, who loves working with people. But let's call out a few specific lessons you told me before we started recording. One of these was with Martha Doyle, the Chief Operating Officer at EF Education. And you said from Martha, you learned that the best outcomes are created when teamwork is at the forefront. So how did you learn this from Martha? Yeah,
so Martha is a force of nature. She is one of these people who is magnetic in her presence. She walks into a room and she just lights up the room. And she's held several different positions over her. She started out actually as Bertel Hult's personal assistant. And, grew over the years and has been, president of different divisions and now CAO. And one of the things that always struck me when I was first working for Martha was how seemingly incongruous her leadership team was. So she was a very distinct personality, and yet the team that she surrounded herself with were very, very different in terms of tone, in temperament, in style, in, interpersonal skills. And, I think as a young person, I never totally understood, it just seemed, like an island of misfit toys.
Island misfit toys, yeah.
But I think as I got older, I realized that there was just such a strategic way that she assembled her teams to really balance out each other. She found people who enjoyed working together, but who brought really radically different things to the table. And I think that was a lesson that I adopted very early on. Nobody is good at everything, right? And to pretend like you are is silly. So I love working with people who are way better than me at certain things. And so that's a lesson I learned from her. Yeah. And I will also say my interview with her, and when she interviewed me, she asked me two of the funniest interview questions I've ever been asked. One was, where am I in the birth order? And the second one was, she asked me to describe my closet. And I went away thinking, God, is there a right answer to this?
Did you ever find the reason why she asked those questions? Or?
I think she was just looking to see how you answer them. It wasn't about the answer. It was just how you answer them.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I like what you talk about. And externally, it can look like an island of misfit toys, but really it could be like weaknesses and strengths balancing each other out. And so I wonder for you, like, have you ever identified a weakness you had, and how did you find another team member that can kind of have a
Oh,
strength
yeah.
there and balance each other out?
I
Like,
mean,
for example,
have I
I
ever
interviewed.
identified weakness?
Well, I mean, how did you do that? Like, how did you find the weakness? How did you find the
Well,
other
I
person?
usually have people telling me what my weaknesses are, so that makes it really easy. You know, if you have good working relationships with your colleagues, they are happy to tell you what you stink at. So for me, one of the things about me is I am a crazy introvert. Yeah, you were too.
Yeah, me
I think
too,
we
me
talked
too,
about
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
You
I
don't, by the way, you don't come off like that at all. You are so outgoing and well spoken, and you've engaged me more in this episode than a lot of outgoing
Oh,
people. So
thanks.
you're really hiding it well. We'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
No, I mean, I like people. It's just, yeah. Anyway. And so one of the things that I tend not to be amazing at is, building team culture. So I'm great at assembling teams. I'm not always great at sustaining teams. Like my personality, I love change. I love solving problems. I love finding problems. And so what happens for me, if you work for me, is that I am always just looking over the horizon to find the next problem that we can tackle. And so there's very little time for celebration and joy. And so I absolutely look to other people to help me with that and to be like, hold up, you need to go do something for the team, or you need to schedule some fun time, or you need to do something. Yeah. And I think at various times I have, I mentioned this guy, Healy. He's so creative, even after we stopped working together, he's still my go-to for, if I need a little bit of inspiration or I need a new way of looking at something, I'll dial him up and say, help me work through this problem. Yeah. I mean, no one does it all by themselves. Marketing requires such a broad spectrum of skills. You need data, you need analytics, you need strategy, you need creativity, you need design. Like no one's good at all of that. So yeah, I'm happy to say that I'm not, and frankly, the other nice part about I'm a generalist. So I am, better than average at most things, but I'm not as great as any of the specialists in any of the functions. So I absolutely cede to those who are better at me in those things, in those areas.
Yeah, and I think that's how we grow in our career. When I interviewed Dr. Michael Solomon, a professor of marketing at St. Joseph's University, on how I made it marketing, one of his lessons was finding collaborators with complementary skill sets. And so,
Yeah.
like, as a professor, he needed that. Like, I forget, it was like a professor in Belgium who had some skill because they're doing specific research, and like professors and researchers need to do that. Sometimes,
Yeah.
like you said, Christine, we feel like we have to wear this hat of everything in marketing, where there's very few industries where one person does everything.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, it ties into your next lesson too. Present situations in a win-win light. So, I mean, there's definitely a win-win when you find the right, complementary person. But talking about presenting situations in a win-win light, you learned this from Shane Steffens, who you mentioned earlier, the president of the F Academy. How'd you learn this from Shane?
So this again it goes back to what I was saying before. Is Shane was a master of creating consensus, and so, the idea behind gaining consensus, and I will also say, marketing is so reliant, in my experience, on having internal buy-in at every level. So like I have never run a successful campaign or had a successful season where we weren't aligned from the CEO to the entry-level person who is doing data. Like everyone needs to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and what's important. So Shane, again, just had this way of engaging people and always seeking to understand a point of view that he didn't agree with and then share his point of view. And you just kind of find that when you seek to not be right and you seek to understand, everybody ends up feeling kind of like a winner, and people, again, from the highest level need to feel like they contribute,
So I think that's a great internal communication lesson. But I feel like a lot of those internal communication lessons, I always like to think of, well, how can they apply to our outward communication, to our marketing? And so I wonder if you've ever taken this, the win-win approach in any marketing messaging. And, for example, I did a case study with Valencia CF, which is a soccer club in La Liga. And they came up with a win-win by they created a game for their fans, and then the sponsors had prizes, right? So they figured, hey, this would be a great win-win. this will be something fun for our fans to do, and they can get some prizes, but it's a way for our sponsors to kind of organically get in front of the customers, you know? So, I mean, for you, have you ever taken that win-win mentality and turned it into marketing messaging, branding, a campaign?
Yeah, going back to college break, and this again was like probably the first year Facebook was happening, we created one of the first, quizzes where you would fill out a quiz and show your results. And it was around how many countries have you been in the world? And there was this, it probably got over 1 million participants posting, and we had no idea, again, because I don't think we really understood the power of Facebook at the time. But there was a win for the customer in that they got to kind of showcase what their travel resume looked like. There was a win for us because we were branding. There was frankly a win for Facebook because they were growing. But really I think any marketing campaign should make the customer feel like they're winning. Like, there's really no reason to engage with a product or engage with any kind of asset if you don't feel like there's a value that's going to be delivered to you. So, yeah.
But that is a great, you were talking about influencers before, customers before, and for social media. I mean, that is a great lesson specifically for those venues where it's like, make them look good and they'll want to share it, right? Make them feel good and they'll want to share it. So you said power comes from attitude, attention, and presence. And you learned this from Jessica Fine, Vice President of Strategic Brand Alliances at Bright Horizons. So how did you learn this lesson from Jessica?
Yeah. Okay. So this is more of a leadership lesson, not necessarily a marketing lesson, but Jessie is, I shall say, a dear friend of mine now, but I joined with her at Bright Horizons, and she is someone who had or has a very complicated home life. She had a daughter who was struggling with a mitochondrial disease and, required round-the-clock care, and her home life was incredibly, incredibly complicated. She had another child with some other challenges, and yet when Jessie would show up to work, Jessie was there. There was no question about where Jessie's focus was. There was no question about her energy. She loved what she was doing, and she was absolutely magnetic and captivating. And frankly, I will also say the amount of energy this woman has is unbelievable. She is hosting her own podcast now called I Don't Know How She Does It. She just wrote a book. But I love being around, and frankly, this has had a lot to do with my career choices. I love being around people who are just so passionate about what they do that they can't turn it off, and so that's something that I try to really tap into. And, I don't think I'm naturally, I don't have Jessie's level of energy by any means. But I do find that, if I feel like my energy, if I'm not bringing it, I will do stuff to adjust. I'll go for a walk. I will take a day off. I will, go read a book, refuel my soul, try to find something that's, beautiful and inspirational. Frankly, some of the new TV is actually so, idea provoking. It's fantastic. So Jessie, and she delivered great work. She was always ready to partner and think with you.
So do you work at home? I mean, I think we're at home now, right?
I work from home full time now. Yeah.
So how do you separate that to do that? Have you learned? Have you figured anything out?
I have not figured out working from home. I love it. It's so much better for my work-life balance, but I definitely miss the energy of human interaction. That part is hard. I mean, I try to go out to our headquarters, every other month. I happen to work now with the most fantastic group of guys who are just so fun and have so much energy, and that I can feel it through Slack. So that part is nice. Yeah.
Well, because when I heard your story, I mean, at first that's very powerful, and I mean, I can't imagine going through that. I remember of a lesson of VP told me early in my career, not just me, where it was an offsite and she was telling everyone. And this was when Blackberries were really big. And she's like, what I hate is you're at an event or a conference or wherever you are, and you're in a hallway and you run into someone you haven't seen in a while and you're talking to them, and then it's your BlackBerry, something happens, and then you're like, doing your BlackBerry, boom, 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 but you're like talking to that person. And she's like, I'm not going to live my life like that. I'm not going to have my career like that. And I don't think you should either. Like, be where you are.
Yeah.
And so that lesson seriously always really stuck with me. Be where you are.
Yeah.
And like, be all in. And if she could do that, like that's got to be so hard.
Yeah.
How could you not be thinking of your child all the time?
Yeah.
All that. I mean, I think we all can. And working from home, something I have tried to do is to have some sort of separation where it's like, okay, I'm trying to be I'm going to go in the other room. I'm doing whatever I'm doing all into this working what I'm doing now. And then when I close the laptop, I try to, as much as I can, unless there's a crisis, be all out of it. And that's been helpful for me. And I interviewed a agency leader the other day. One thing he told me too that I thought was interesting, where he had to have both a creative and a kind of like business side, is he would like do the creative job. Then he would change into a suit. He would walk around the block. He would come back and he would sit down and be the financial. Like,
oh my God.
To get some separation and be like, okay, whatever I'm doing, I am doing this and I'm all in. So,
yeah.
But it's
I
not
will say,
easy.
the other thing, the woman that I mentioned, Martha Doyle, the other thing that was very funny about working with her is she was always late for meetings. Always late for meetings. But it was because whatever meeting she was in before, she would stay with that person until the problem was solved. So,
Wow.
the beautiful part is when you got her, you could have her till 11 p.m. if that's the time that you needed, So, yeah, it's a lesson I suppose we're all learning.
That's beautiful. Well, let's take a look at, I think this may be the final lesson we're talking about. No role is high enough to be disconnected from day-to-day activities and initiatives. You learned this from Arthur Brett Schneider, the CEO of Seniorly, who I assume is your current boss. So how did you learn this from Arthur?
Yeah, just by watching. I mean, Arthur is an incredible force of nature. He is one of these guys who is both just very, very smart, very practical, very empathetic, again, another magnetic personality. And there is, you think at a CEO level, there is a certain set of like larger, kind of more strategic things that you focus on. But Arthur is in the weeds whenever we need it. If we need QA, he is there. If I need an opinion on something, related to a piece of content, he is there. He is, reviewing profile pages on the weekends and helping us find, bugs. And that is something that I think in an accelerated growth phase, you need from everybody. So, he sets an incredible example for ownership of and commitment to the product that you're selling. Like, kind of goes back to like, you have to build a great product, and that takes everyone. That's not in any one single person's purview. Everyone contributes to that.
So I love the humility of that. I love the focus on the customer of that. But as you mentioned, like a lot of these lessons, I'm thinking like, how do you balance it? As you mentioned, when you're in that accelerated growth phase, you are the head of growth.
Yep.
With growth, we need to figure out how to scale. So I wonder how you balance this lesson about not being disconnected from the day-to-day to ultimately getting into a place where you can grow and scale. So for example, let me this might give you an idea. I interviewed Shruti Joshi, the chief operating officer of Facet, on how I made it in marketing. And one of her lessons was process is the foundation for success. I mean, she's talking about the rollout of Verizon Fios and what she did there and how like process was so key to it. So for you, head of growth, I'm sure you're thinking through this. Great, we've got the CEO. He's super in the weeds. This is so helpful. But now how do we scale? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have always held the belief that in most organizations, strategy is overemphasized, execution is underemphasized. And so you can have the greatest strategy in the world, and if you are not paying attention to the details on execution, you are not kind of building the product or delivering the campaign or, whatever the promise is, if that's not happening on the execution side, that's where it all falls apart. So for me, and this is part of what helps us scale, is that when we get the delivery of a new product or feature right, because we're a tech forward company, because we do everything, using or leveraging technology, it is inherently scalable. So as long as we get the initial build right, then usually we've designed it in a way where it is scalable.
Let me ask you, now here you're talking about technology and you've gotten to know your customers so well. So I wonder if you can help everyone listening who markets to senior citizens with this and figuring out this balance, right? So, and this may be a bias, but when we think of senior citizens, we tend not to think of technology, right? We tend to think of the opposite. They're tech averse. So how are you making that balance? How are you being, as you said, tech forward and being very tech enabled, yet focused on the senior audience? One, do we have it wrong? Or two, is there just something differently you're doing to get them into it?
Yeah, no, I think it has to do with the demographic shifts that are happening right now. So what we're seeing, I'm sure you've heard of this thing called the silver wave. It's the advent of kind of the largest single group of older adults probably in the last 100 years. And these are baby boomers. And these baby boomers have really different tech habits than their parents do or did. So, what's above them is the silent generation. So I think when we talk about older adults and their aversion to technology, like I will say two things. One is I don't think we've kind of contemplated where the break happens because the younger set of older adults is very different technologically than the older set. And two, I will say that COVID really accelerated the adoption of a lot of technology forward habits and devices. So things like cell phones that a lot of older adults used to not have, they got those. FaceTime, they're using. Alexa, they're using much more. So I think it's really in a state of change. And what the other thing that I will say is what's probably even more influential on how these older adults will be using technology is how their Gen X kids are using technology, because these Gen X kids now are, pushing 50 into their 50s. And I'm there.
I know when you say that, I still think of Gen X as being, but we are, but go on.
Yeah. We're not young and cool anymore. But
still cool, not young, but go on.
Yeah, that's true. And, we are going to be setting the kind of technology habits for our parents as they age. And so I think it's that combination of baby boomers aging up, having a different set of expectations and experience with technology, and then the influence of their children. So, like I go when I visit my dad, I set him up with Alexa, I have the rotating digital photos that I can upload from my home in Boston. And yeah.
That's good. Well, Christine, we've talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer, from all your stories, from all your lessons, from your career. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Okay. I'm sure I will get tons of people who disagree with me on this, but for me, marketing is all about finding problems and solving them. So, it starts with finding the pain points in your customer's experience. Why do they really need your product? And presenting them a solution. Sometimes it extends to finding problems within your own organization and working cross-functionally to solve them. On a granular campaign level, it's, let's A/B test the heck out of everything. Let's find the problem with the open rate on this email, and let's A/B test some subject lines, some send times, figure out where that problem is. Let's talk about why no one's clicking on the CTA button. Is it the language? Is it the color? Is it the placement? Let's test all those things. So I don't know what it says about me, but I like to look at the world in terms of a collection of problems that are totally solvable.
I'm glad you said that. Let me tell you why. Because on LinkedIn, I see all these people say I'm the rock star of marketing, right? And I'm like, man, that just doesn't sit well with me. And I will mention, so I'm Gen X. You kind of called me out when you were talking about these Gen Xers here. I'm getting old. But I'll mention I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan. And Eddie Vedder is literally a rock star. And I once heard him say, they were asking what's it like to be a rock star. And he's like, I don't know. I don't want to be a rock star. He's like, I want to be a plumber. I don't know, that. And I thought, I'm like, yeah, I want to be the plumber of marketing. You know what I mean? And so I like what you're saying, because that's what you do. You're going to go in, you're going to find a problem, and you're going to solve it, and the water's going to be flowing. So I like that, Christine.
And there are tons of marketers. We all have very different approaches. One is not better than the other. That's just kind of what makes it fun for me.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was fun, Christine.
I know, it was fun for me too. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, and thanks to everyone for listening. Hopefully it was fun for you as well.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.